As questions continue to swirl about social media and the role of foreign interference in the last American presidential election, Canadians may be wondering about our own upcoming election. With upwards of 20 million users here, Facebook Canada is a premier platform for news and information sharing. Is it ready for what might come leading up to the October vote? Kevin Chan is head of public policy with Facebook Canada, and he joins us now for more on that. Thanks for coming in.
Thanks for having me.
Let's start with the preparations for the upcoming vote, which is less than 6 months away. This communication security establishment says it is very likely that we will experience foreign cyber interference in the next election. The Minister of Foreign Affairs for Canada says foreign actors will likely try to meddle. How concerned are you that they're right?
Well, I think we're always vigilant to make sure that we do the right thing, to ensure that we have a good sense of what's happening on the platform and that we're always looking for abuses. If I may, I think when you go back to the CSE report, the Communications Security Establishment report, I think what was very positive about it, actually, the most recent one, was they actually said that they didn't think that there was going to be a significant disruptive event like we saw in the US presidential election in 2016 happening this October. And I think that's actually a very positive thing to be able to say now.
Well, we're also not as important as they are, so that might have some explanation behind it as well.
Well, I mean, I think the important thing to know is that, you know, these are security issues, right? Mm-hmm. And so, of course, we want to be sure that we are doing all that we can to manage the security risks. I think they are right to be vigilant. We certainly are vigilant.
Well, can I push back on that? The Minister of Democratic Institutions, Karina Gould, says there's a lot left to be desired in terms of how seriously Facebook are taking these issues. You want to respond to her?
Yeah, I mean, look, I mean, the reality is we have made significant investments in people and in technology and in partnerships. You know, people, we've grown in the last 2 years, we've grown our security team from 10,000 to 30,000 people.
Worldwide.
Worldwide. We have now, since the Ontario provincial election, which would have been about a year ago,
almost,
we've had a cross-functional team dedicated just to elections in Canada, both at the federal election, so for obviously for October, but also for all the provincial elections, including the current one happening in Newfoundland and Labrador. On the technology side, we've invested significantly in artificial intelligence, technologies that actually didn't exist even 3 or 4 years ago, to proactively find fake accounts and disable these en masse. And we have significant partnerships with organizations like Agence France Presse, like Equal Voice, to do the things we need to do to make sure that we do ensure that there are no bad actors that are trying to orchestrate abuses on the platform.
We will follow up on that because I'm interested in all of those things. However, the minister goes on to say that your company has been giving the Canadian government significantly less information about preventing interference than Facebook has given, for example, European governments. Is that the case?
I think it's important to stress that what we do with what we brief governments on is when we find that there are, in fact, what we call coordinated inauthentic behavior on the platform.
I'm not hearing a denial, though.
Well, because the thing is we haven't seen that kind of coordinated inauthentic behavior in Canada. So I'll tell you, we've done various takedowns, and I think you've actually taken a look at some of these, where we do publicize, and we tell the public, and we tell public authorities when we are aware of an orchestrated attempt to pretend to be something that they're not, and we take these down. And we've done these in the US, we've done these in the UK, we've done these in the Middle East. Every time that we've had one of these coordinated inauthentic behavior takedowns, there has been no linkages or networks into Canada. We will obviously remove content that is inauthentic or fake accounts, and I think that's an ongoing effort. I think what we're talking about today is more, are people out there, bad actors out there trying to deceive people, coordinate, and try to sow division or abuse the platform in some way?
And what's the answer?
And that kind of coordinated inauthentic behavior, we just have not seen that in Canada.
So you're saying it doesn't exist?
I think what we're saying is we haven't seen it. That doesn't mean that it may not happen.
Okay, if you're being vigilant for this behavior, who are the people and or groups that you are on the lookout for?
It could be actually really anything. So actually what we're looking at is not specifically individuals. We're actually looking at behavior. So what we want to know is to say, well, if we find evidence that somebody or some page or some group or some individual on Facebook is actually doing things that they are actually coordinating with others and pretending to be something that they're not, we will remove them from the platform.
Can you give an example of that, just so we get a better sense of what you're talking about?
Oh, sure. So in the Vancouver municipal election, that happened, I think, last fall, there was some publicity on this, or there was some media coverage where we actually took down 2 fake accounts that were, again, kind of posting things into groups or making certain claims. And it turns out that these accounts didn't map back to real people. And we have a very strong authentic identity policy on Facebook. If you need to be who you say you are on Facebook.
Unlike Twitter, when you can be anybody or nobody and get away with lots.
Well, I think the internet has raised this issue about anonymity online. I think that's sort of kind of a facet of the internet that's existed since the internet's existed. But Facebook is a bit different on that, right? You actually, the culture of it since the very beginning is you need to be a real person. And so if we have indications that you're not, that's a violation of our community standards, and we will take action. So those are the kind of one-off or individual things we're talking about. I think what public authorities want to know is, do we see something broader? Do we see a coordinated, strategic attempt to achieve some kind of outcome? And certainly it would be the case that if we did see something like this in Canada, or if we made a movement to take something down in some other part of the world, and there were linkages to Canada, you can be assured, and certainly public authorities should be assured, that we would certainly not only publicize this, but we would brief public law authorities and we would brief the government.
So 6 months before the next election, so far, you're here tonight telling us you have not seen that.
That's correct.
Okay. Can you tell us why you think these so-called bad actors would want to target Canada? What's the motive?
So we don't really know the motivation, and because we're a platform and we're kind of out just to sort of be able to make that distinction between inauthenticity and sort of real people, it's very hard for us to understand motivation, and we tend to leave that to others that are better equipped to do that.
Because one of the things I read about the last American election is that they clearly, many of the people who were inauthentically trying to influence the outcome were clearly for Trump, but that there are lots of people around the world who are not actually for any particular candidate over another. They just want to disrupt and create a lack of confidence in democracy in general. So do you have a better sense about whether or not those who might want to be bad actors in this election are aiming at a particular outcome, or are they just trying to make trouble?
Well, I mean, bad actors are bad actors. We do think about it generally in 2 broad categories. One is economically motivated people. So people are just going to put all sorts of stuff online and see if they can drive traffic to their site to monetize. So we think, so we do think that there's some aspect of it that's economically motivated. And then there's the second piece, which is the strategic motivations. But as to sort of why or to what advantage, I just don't think we're well placed to make that kind of call. But I can tell you that we do tend to think about it in 2 buckets, right? The ones who are motivated financially, and then the ones who have some kind of different strategic geopolitical outcome in mind.
I don't want to exaggerate this, obviously, if it ought not to be exaggerated, but certainly many political leaders in this country have made a lot of hay about this and have expressed a great deal of concern about it. So I wonder if you'd weigh in on how much, danger? How much danger you think the electorate is in if, their eyebrows are not up, if they're not paying attention?
I think it's very important to always be vigilant. And it's the same for us. It's the same for, I think, public authorities. It's the same for Canadians. When you see things online, in fact, a key tenet of digital literacy is, in fact, to think before you take action. Think before you share. We have a partnership with Media Smarts, which is Canada's digital literacy organization. And one of the key things that we're kind of talking about and putting out in terms of learning guides and public service announcements is, in fact, this idea that if you see some content that seems too good to be true, or that's kind of evoking some kind of emotional response, that's kind of the moment when you should be thinking through, are there things here that I should be asking myself? Should I maybe search for this to see whether or not it's a hoax, whether or not other people have done some investigative reporting on it?
Like Pope endorses Donald Trump for president. That would have been a good one to perhaps be vigilant about.
Perhaps.
Well, here's one here. Sheldon, can we bring this one up here? This is an example of a Facebook post. This is from a group in the UK that is trying basically just to sow discontent and spread disinformation. And, here's the headline here. 1 in 10 gay Christians bullied by other LGBT people because of their faith. and it quotes a website called premier.org, which is nothing. Now this is fake. This is fake. It's designed to spread disinformation. Can you give us some tips for spotting? I know Trump talks about fake news. This really is fake news.
So this is interesting. So I think if I understand correctly, this would have been one of the examples actually of our coordinated inauthentic behavior takedowns. This was an example that we gave of a batch of things, of a network that we took down. The challenge with this actually is interesting because again, it comes down to this question of we're not going to focus on content. Because if you look at the content, it's not something that would be illegitimate in the sense that you wouldn't take this down. It's not a violation of our community standards. So rather than look at the content, what we focus on is behavior. And the reason why we know that this is actually inauthentic or fake is because when we started digging into accounts associated with these kinds of posts, we realized that they were all connected in some way in the background. We knew that they were actually all coordinating with each other, posting and sharing very similar things, and that they didn't map back to real people. And so once we have done our investigative work and we know this, we can take them down. And we publicize it, and that's precisely why you have that example now.
You have apparently taken down 1.5 billion fake accounts in just the second and third quarters of 2018.
That's correct.
That is a lot of taken down, Kevin.
That is a lot. And in many cases, I can tell you, in many cases, they were taken down within seconds of registration. And that, again, is our artificial intelligence systems being able to proactively identify fake accounts being set up the moment they're being set up.
There's a well-known news organization in this world called AFP, Agence France Presse. What role do they have with Facebook?
So Agence France Presse is a newswire, as you know, and they are our partners in Canada for third-party fact-checking. And so this is another way in which we're trying to get at this challenge of misinformation online. If an individual on Facebook reports a story or a published article or an image or a video on Facebook as being potentially inauthentic or fake, then Agence France Presse, as our partner, will be in receipt of this, and they can go in and do what journalists do best, which is to get at the truth, to get at the story. They will then be able to write a story that cites the facts, that debunks this article. And once they've completed that work, we are going to notify, what we do is we notify everybody who's ever seen that story that it's actually been fact-checked. We will massively reduce the distribution of that story, on average about 80%. And the AFP article will now appear adjacent to that fake or inauthentic article, if you will, anywhere on the platform.
Okay. There are a lot of people who are on social media who believe that you are part of the deep state. They think that we are part of the deep state. They are very suspicious of a lot of players in Western democracies. And they may look at your background and they may say, hey, this is a guy who used to work for the Federal Liberal Party, used to work for Michael Ignatieff. And they will wonder whether you are bringing to the current job that you have, which is a nonpartisan role, a partisan lens. What would you say to them?
Well, look, it's simply not accurate. I mean, I've spent 2 years working for Michael Ignatieff. He was actually my professor from a long time ago, which is why I ended up working for him. In a career that has been over 15 years. I spent more time as a nonpartisan public servant, and I've worked at McGill University, and now I'm here at Facebook, and I've spent 4.5 years at Facebook. And the truth of the matter is, we're a platform for all voices. And so in my job here, we actually need to be working and supporting all political stripes. And that's a very important thing for us and something that we do and we're very mindful of on a day-to-day basis.
Here's something from the United Kingdom House of Commons report called Disinformation and Fake News. This came out in February. And these were some findings following an 18-month investigation into disinformation and fake news. They said Facebook has continually hidden behind obfuscation. It continues to choose profit over data security, taking risks in order to prioritize their aim of making money from user data. It seems clear to us that Facebook acts only when serious breaches become public. Companies like Facebook should not be allowed to behave like digital gangsters in the online world, considering themselves to be ahead of and beyond the law. Okay, Kevin, your response to that?
Well, I think we've already been very clear about our posture with respect to regulation and legislation. We welcome it, and we've talked about, and our CEO, Mark Zuckerberg, has been very clear that in particular in the areas of content, in the area of privacy, in the area of elections, and in the area of data portability, we think it is actually very helpful if governments lay down baselines and establish proper frameworks. I would say actually the other thing though is that in Canada we're actually doing pretty well as a general statement about what frameworks are like. We actually do have a national privacy framework, right? We've had this since 1999 or 2000. We now most recently have a new election law, C-76, which actually does regulate online platforms and political advertising as it pertains to elections. And so in many ways, I would say in my role on a global policy team, looking at all the countries in which we do operate, Canada already has taken significant leadership in actually getting some of these frameworks right.
Do you feel, I mean, let's be honest here, most people I know love Facebook. They love to be on Facebook, they love sharing their pictures, they love telling their stories, they get a lot of news and information off Facebook. And most millennials I know don't really care about the fact that you've got all sorts of personal private information about them. Do you think you're a bit of a whipping boy right now that some critics and media just love to hound Facebook for whatever reasons?
I think that the internet generally, but also Facebook specifically, it has given rise to a lot of issues that are not necessarily new issues, but are issues that are kind of seen through a different prism because they're on the internet. And so we know we have a lot of work to do. This is something, and we can't do it alone. So obviously we are doing things. We are drastically changing the way the platform works. We are trying to give Canadians greater transparency in political advertising. We are trying to develop partnerships. But the thing is, we do need to work with more people. And that's what we intend to do between now and the election, but quite frankly, way past the election.
Okay, let's finish up on this. Michael Warnick, former clerk of the Privy Council. I think many more people know who he is today than did 6 months ago when he obviously gained a great deal of notoriety testifying before a parliamentary committee on the SNC-Lavalin business. And he said something during the course of his testimony that really captured a great deal of attention. He expressed a genuine concern that he feared some politician in this country was going to be assassinated during the upcoming election campaign, in part because of they'd be motivated to do it by something they read on social media. And he called the discourse on social media a vomitorium. That's basically how he referred to it. How much do you feel Facebook is responsible for the vomitorious nature of social media?
Well, I think what we're seeing is actually people being able to have a voice. And whether or not you or I or others agree or disagree, I think it's very important that a platform that is open, like Facebook, needs to be able to allow for as much expression of views as possible.
But not hate.
And so that's right. So there
yes, hate.
But there are areas where we do have community standards, right? And so there are areas like hateful speech, which is actually a much higher threshold than the hate laws in Canada. If you kind of go into these kind of territory, or if you go into territory like pornography or child exploitation, those things are not allowed on our platform. But if it's not these kinds of categories of things, we do think it's important that we give as much space to legitimate speech as possible. And incidentally, Steve, I would say, people are not, like Mr. Warnick wouldn't be the only one. I mean, I've personally had people say things online against me. And I think that's just, so I just want you to know, I understand where that's coming from, but I also understand the principles that are at stake. And freedom of expression, the ability to express your opinions, whether or not I agree with them or you agree with them, is something very precious and something we need to work hard to strike a balance on.
No, clearly finding the balance between free speech and illegal speech and truly genuinely hateful speech is, there's a lot of gray area there. And one person's hateful speech is just another person's tough criticism. How confident are you guys are going to find the right balance and find that sweet spot that will satisfy people.
Right, and so we've kind of talked about two different things we want to do. So Mark Zuckerberg announced late last year that we're actually going to build an oversight board, an external, independent oversight board by the end of this year that's going to be staffed by very prominent people from around the world who are going to actually take over this kind of role, or at least some of this role. We don't think that it's right for Facebook, actually, to be making these decisions about who should be able to say what on the platform or what stays up and what goes down. So we want to create this board, external and independent from Facebook, that is going to actually govern speech on the platform. There is a consultation process open. It's still open right now online. You can find it if you search for it. And we welcome input not just from experts and constitutional scholars that we're talking to, but indeed from people from all walks of life. And we hope that people do apply their knowledge and sort of submit something. So that's one piece. I think the other piece on this is that we do want to make sure that that governments do actually set baselines. We agree with you that you don't want Facebook to have a certain standard and other platforms to have different standards. We think that actually having governments step in and say, well, collectively as a society, we think that this should be the baseline for speech online. That's actually a good thing. It will bring clarity to what we're all trying to achieve, which is, again, this fine balance between freedom of expression and prohibited speech.
Good. Kevin, we want to thank you for spending so much time with us here on the agenda the last couple of nights, so we appreciate it very much. That's Kevin Chan. He's the head of public policy for Facebook Canada. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
The Agenda with Steve Bacon is brought to you by the Chartered Professional Accountants of Ontario, helping businesses stay on the right side of change with strategic thinking, insightful decisions, and business leadership. Are you on the right side of change? Ask an Ontario CPA.